Our next speaker is industrial hygienist Tom Laubenthal.
Good afternoon, folks. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I want to thank Linda and Emily and the ADAO sponsors for putting this all together. I have the opportunity to speak to you folks before. I've been in the industry, asbestos control industry, since 1984. I have been an advocate as well as a regulatory expert. But I also follow lead paint issue, and I want to thank Dr. Raha Flores for bringing up what's going on with the Housing Authority in New York. I've been following that very closely, and it is a mess. I wish we had more time to talk about that, but I think he covered it pretty well. What I want to cover today is asbestos in the home, specifically for homeowners. I'm not going to be dealing with Housing Authority type stuff. I think Dr. Flores has covered that pretty well. And when we get to further things, I'll talk about people with rentals a bit. All right, so legacy asbestos, I think Brett covered this pretty well, but those materials that are present in millions of homes. So that's what my focus will be to drill down on, but also in incalculable quantities in commercial and industrial structures. Getting the EPA to ban all asbestos use in the U.S. is a very important step. The Alan Reinstein Act is near and dear to our heart, and we fight to keep that alive and keep it moving. But we cannot ignore the quantity of asbestos-containing materials in the United States and not determine. It's a very important part. One of the things we need to do is not only determine whether we have asbestos in these buildings, but does it actually provide a risk? So what I want to talk about specifically for homeowners is what we call real versus perceived risks. And we'll talk about that as we go along. So what I want to do is drill down a little bit. Brent showed you some general things here of things we find in homes, especially older homes. Again, modern building construction often doesn't have asbestos, but it's not 100%. We never know what we might find there because we do not have a ban. Okay, almost all ACM or asbestos-containing materials in modern construction will be low risk in homes if in good shape and left undisturbed. All right, so one of the most common materials that we find in homes are these textured ceilings, and there are many, many different versions of these things. These things are friable materials, but many of them have been in buildings for years. And as long as they're in good shape, they're not delaminating, they're not falling apart, they're not water damaged. They provide low risk, but the fact is we need to make sure that we leave this alone. But what I want you to notice is the picture that's in the bottom left, where we have the laminating material. This can happen from age, it can happen from vibration, it can happen from water damage. These are the kinds of materials that we need to pay attention to because asbestos can be released when these sorts of things occur. We need to get professional help. So as an example of real versus perceived risk, at the top, people get afraid because they have these materials in homes, but I do not believe there would be significant asbestos fibers merely because of its presence. But once we have the materials that are damaged like this, or they would be disturbed, then we can have significant risk. Another material that's very common is the flooring that we find in homes. In the pictures that you see in the two left pictures, 9 by 9 inch floor tiles and one in gray, they're 12 by 12 inch floor tiles. They are very, very common in buildings. And what happens is that these materials can fall apart and be a problem. Actually, what we find in research is if you have these, keep them waxed. A good old school floor wax keeps them from being scuffed up and maybe releasing asbestos. And as long as they're in good shape, they're fine. But it has everything to do with their condition, okay? The other material that we see on the right is what we call linoleum or the sheet flooring. Some of that stuff can have very high percentage, 75% asbestos, chrysotile asbestos in the backing. Again, we leave it alone, it's fine, but you can see the damage in the picture here. That is actually exposing chrysotile bearing material. And if that was being walked on, excuse me, over and over again in the home, that would be a problem. Actually, I had to speak to someone last night that's a colleague where an abatement contractor went into the basement of somebody's home, and actually not an abatement contractor, just a flooring contractor, and ripped one of these up and made a heck of a mess. And there's contamination now all over the basement, and luckily it didn't get through the house because the air conditioning system was not running. But they're going to have to do a massive abatement and cleanup because this was done poorly. So again, we have to be careful with these materials. If they're in good shape, we can leave them be, but if they're damaged or we need to get rid of them, we want professional help. Another one that you see on the left is super common in just about every kind of building, what we call wallboard joint compound. And a lot of people don't have a construction background that might not recognize this because most of our walls are painted. But when we hang up this gypsum drywall, what they'll do is use a sealer to make the seams smooth to the wallboard itself. And you notice little dots, that's where they're covering up the screws or the nail heads. these materials can have asbestos. But in most homes, it's been painted over many times. So as long as that's covered and in good shape and not exposed and damaged, we're in good shape. But we really don't know. This is one of those problematic materials that has gotten into modern construction, although it is super common in the older construction. When we get into the damaging of these walls, we read to know what's there. And if they have to be damaged during renovation or partial demolition of a home, we need to make sure we know what we have. Then the other picture on the right would be things like window glazing compound, caulk, sealants, mastics, which are glues. Many of those things have asbestos in them, but as long as they're in good shape, we're not disturbing them, they're not going to cause significant risk in a home. Then asbestos cement shingles that are very, very common on homes. We use the term transite for this. It's an old Johns Manville term that's become common. Very, very common, various kinds of manners in which they're made and applied. But in most homes, these are painted. And as long as they remain painted and undisturbed, they'll be fine. But we've had circumstances where homeowners wanted to take these things off themselves. These are very hard and very brittle, and you're going to make quite a friable mess if you try to take these things off. They can be removed, but quite frankly, you can leave them in place. And as long as they're in good shape, we don't disturb them, we keep them painted, it would be at low risk. These can also be found on roofing as well. And unfortunately, what we find in industrial applications of this, it is not painted. These things weather badly and can put asbestos in soil, but it's probably not as likely around homes, but it certainly is more of a bigger aspect when it comes to industrial and commercial applications. Boilers that we have in older homes, in the older parts of the country, we could still have steam type boilers. This is not uncommon with people with heating oil systems or old steam boiler type systems. What you see in the far left is a boiler that is not covered. That's literally the asbestos material that's exposed. Then we see the pipes in the middle. It's sort of like, ugh, they're not in great shape. I would probably not call that in good shape. And the one that you see on the far right is steam pipes where we have missing insulation and things that are falling apart. This requires professional servicing, folks. This isn't the kind of thing you would want to do. Now, what we can do is there is a possibility with the pipes you see in the middle and the boiler at the left, because this is so expensive to remove, they may be able to do a type of process we call enclosure, where they could put what is called lagging cloth over these materials, although that would have a high cost as well, but probably less expensive than removal. The bottom line is, don't disturb this stuff. If we have to disturb it, get professional assistance. Then vermiculite. And many of you have heard about vermiculite. This is a mica-like material that was mined in Libby, Montana. It does contain asbestos. We call it Libby amphibola asbestos these days. Very common as attic insulation. We find it primarily up north, although down here in the south, I'm in Florida. I lived most of my life in Georgia. We do find it as well. And again, we need to leave this material alone and not disturb it. It can generate quite a bit of airborne asbestos. What we can do is have professional help come in and maybe put plywood over these surfaces. We certainly wouldn't want to drag Christmas boxes back and forth across these surfaces like this, because we could generate asbestos in that way. So get it covered and don't disturb it. And if you don't know it contains asbestos, it's best to assume that it does. So let me do the last few slides here. And risk in homes, we can map presence, but the possibility of airborne asbestos is very low if ACM is in good condition and it is not disturbed. The mere presence does not impose high risk. That doesn't mean zero, but I'm saying not a high risk. ACM not in good condition, have it repaired or removed only by a licensed, experienced contractor. Then, if you suspect you may have ACM, have an experienced licensed asbestos inspector perform a survey to determine if it is present. Don't guess, folks. If you need to know, but try to find a small inspection company. Most web pages, you can find what are called environmental firms and ask if they do inspections on homes. A lot of times your smaller companies handle this at a reasonable fee, but make sure that when they give you a report, you keep those reports. So that way in the future, if we're going to do renovation, we're going to know what contains asbestos or not. Okay. Knowing if ACM is present is very important before renovation in a home or demolition work. Now, some states where I'm at in the south part of Florida, the 3 Florida counties that we have in the south part of the state actually require surveys for asbestos, even working in homes, but that's not everywhere. Most states actually don't regulate in that way with private homes. With demolition and renovation, know you have material. Here's the thing you need to remember. Most renovation contractors are not certified to determine if ACM is present, nor to handle that ACM. It's a risk to your family and to their workers. So avoid exposures, have ACM removed from affected areas of construction. Many home demolition contractors will not check to see if ACM is present before demolition. Dust flying from a home demo in an urban area and affecting you, actually that's been happening quite a bit, and we've had quite a bit of advocacy on that. I worked with a woman in Georgia for about a year, and she pressed the Georgia Environmental Protection Division to start cracking down on some of this, and they actually got additional funding from the EPA to get some help to do that. So as we said with advocacy, it's super important. Toby talked about never, asking too many questions. You can never ask too many questions. So if we have an issue with demolition and you think there could be asbestos involved, call your state asbestos program. All you have to do is Google that. Almost all states have an asbestos program. Make a phone call and see what they can do for you. Federal asbestos rules are not written to protect people in homes, okay? Some states maybe. The regulations we have, EPA and OSHA regulations, are about commerce, business, not private homes. So knowledge is power. So what I have here in yellow, they are not there to help you. And many people believe that these agencies are there to help homeowners, not on the asbestos issue, with lead paint, absolutely, and other things. But asbestos, the rules aren't written that way unless a state has provisions for that. So prevent exposures to you and your family from legacy asbestos. Don't disturb it. Know what you have before renovation. If you have dust from a demolition that is getting into your home and you don't know whether there's asbestos, especially in older neighborhoods now, call the state asbestos program, get someone to come out and look. You don't want to get in the middle of that with a demolition contractor. And again, we don't know if modern construction would have it, but as a general rule, in homes, the older the building, the higher the risk. Now, for those that might live in rentals, I probably should have had a slide on this. It really is the responsibility of the owner and manager to handle those issues. So again, if they're going to do renovation in an apartment and you have things like textured ceilings and drywall, they need to determine whether it's there and make sure the contractor actually handles that, meeting OSHA requirements. Otherwise, you can be exposed as well as their workers. Okay, so as a homeowner, be your own advocate, ask the questions. And again, Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization, and I work very closely with Brent with EIA. We'll be glad to help you as best we can.
Thank you so much, Tom.
And thank you very much.